All right, so today's lesson we are looking at 1.5, which is converting fractions, decimals, and percents. So we'll be converting, for example, fractions to decimals, decimals to fractions, fractions to percent, percent to fractions, decimals to percent, percent to decimals, and lastly we'll also look at converting repeating decimals to fractions. Okay, so a fraction, it's a comparison of how many parts of a whole. A decimal is written with place values. It's a comparison of, for example, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. It depends on how many numbers we have to the right of the decimal. And then a percent is a comparison of how many parts there are out of 100. So firstly, we'll look at fractions to decimals. And when we read this fraction, it's read as 7/8, 7/8, but it's also division. It's also 7 divided by 8. So fraction is technically also division. So when we write this, we can write this as 7 being divided by 8. And now if you do the division, you'll get your fraction into the decimal form. All right, so how many times can 8 go into 7? So 0. And then we're going to start bringing some more zeros here. How many times can 8 go into 70 now? Would be 8 times, which gives us 64. 70 minus 64, that gives me 6. We'll add another 0, bring that down. Now we have 60. How many times can 8 go into 60? 7 times. 8 times 7 is 56. Then we'll subtract. 60 minus 56, that gives me 4. We'll add another 0, and we'll keep doing this until there's no remainders. So now we have 40, and how many times can 8 go into 40? So 5 times, and that's it. There's no remainders. So 7/8 into decimal form is 0.875. So we could say here that 7/8 is equal to 0.875. So next we are looking at converting from a decimal to a fraction. And here, putting it into fraction form, you just need to know the place value of your last decimal. So here, this is tenths, and then this is hundredths. So therefore, our fraction will be over 100. Right? And then we'll just take our 67 and put it over 100. Once you do that, make sure you reduce. In this case, we cannot reduce the fraction, so therefore we would just leave it as 67 over 100. All right, so here another example, we have 0.36. We want to put it into fraction form, so our last number is in the hundredths place, so we would write this as 36 over 100. All right, but you do have to make sure we can reduce this. So we'll reduce this fraction. So 36 and 100, we can divide the top and bottom by 4. I'm just showing it like this. 36 divided by 4 gives me 9, and 100 divided by 4 gives me 25. All right, so make sure it does get reduced. All right, so next we're looking at a fraction, and we need to put it into percent. So from a fraction to a percent, all you're going to do is set up a ratio equation. And we're going to set up our second fraction over 100. And then you can basically use the concept of equivalent fractions to figure out the x portion, or you can use cross multiplication as well. So basically we have 17 over 20, and we know percents are out of 100, so our second fraction is out of 100. And we're trying to solve for here, we'll just call it x. All right, so a couple ways you can do that. You can use cross multiplication, or you can use algebra, or you can just use equivalent fractions. All right, so just gonna pause it here. Okay, so the first method we could use here is equivalent fractions. How many times do we multiply 20 to get to 100? So we can multiply 20 times 5. Right? 20 times 5 will give me 100. So therefore, you could do the same thing to the numerator. You'd also multiply by 5 to give us the value of x here. All right, so 17 times 5 is 85. So therefore this becomes 85 over 100, which is 85%. So x is equal to 85%. So that was done doing equivalent fractions, but it won't always work. So another way you can do equivalent fraction, the other way you can figure out x is by cross multiplication. So I'll just quickly show that as well. So we have 17 over 20 is equal to x over 100. So with cross multiplication, you multiply the two numbers that are diagonal to each other. So we take 17 times 100, and then you just divide by the number that's by itself there, and then you just divide by 20. And then you can put that in your calculator. 17 times 100 divided by 20, which gives us 85. And again, so 85%. All right, so we have 3 over 5, and we want to put it into percent. So you could either use equivalent fractions here. You multiply by 20, top and bottom, and 5 times 20 to give us the 100. So we multiply by 20 here as well. 3 times 20 gives us 60. So 60 over 100, which is 60%. All right, the other method you could have used was cross multiplication. You take the two numbers that are diagonal from each other. That's 3 times 100. And then you would divide by 5. And you get 60 as well. 60%. So next we are looking at percent to fractions. So we have 86%. We know that anytime it's a percent, it's over 100. So we know this would just be 86 over 100 because it's a percent. Percents are always over or out of 100. All right, so it's 86 out of 100. Just make sure you reduce. So reduce here, we can divide the top and bottom, the numerator and denominator. We can divide by 2, which gives me 43 out of 50. So there's a couple ways when working from decimals to percent. One method is just multiply the number by 100. The other method is just move your decimal point over 2 to the right. All right, so first method is you can just take your 0.89 and multiply it by 100, which gives us 89%. The other method is to just move your decimal point over 2 to the right. So just 1, 2 to the right, your decimal point is there, so it becomes 89%. So for example, here we have 5.6. If we just move our decimal point 2 to the right, 1, 2, that gives us 560%. All right, try that last one, 0.08, 0.008. So our last example here, going from a decimal to percent. So one method you could use is if you want to, you can put 0.08 and multiply it by 100. The other method you could use is just move your decimal place 2 to the right. So 1, 2 to the right, that'll put your decimal place right there. So it becomes 0.8%. So next we have percents, and we're going into decimals. So the first method is you can just divide the number by 10. So you can take this 93 and just divide it by 100. All right, that's one method. The other method is just move your decimal point 2 to the left. So 1, 2 to the left, and your decimal point would go there. Now putting this in decimal, it's 0.93, which makes sense because if we had converted this to percent, decimal to percent, it's 93 over 100, right, which is 93%. All right, here we have 156%. So again, you're just moving your decimal point 2 to the left, or you can take 156 and divide by 100. I'm just going to move my decimal point to the left. 1, 2, my decimal point will go there. So it's 1.56 as decimal. All right, try the 5%, put it into decimal. So we had 5%, so you can take 5 divided by 100, or you could just move your decimal point. So in the case of moving the decimal point, it's 2 to the left. So 1 and 2, our decimal point goes there. So fill this in with a 0. That's where your decimal point is. So it's 0.05 as decimal. So here we're looking at converting a repeating decimal to fraction. So before we start that, we just reviewed what's being repeated. So here we have 0.63. The dashed line is covering the 6.3. So therefore 6.3 is repeating. 6.3, 6.3, 6.3, and it'll continue repeating forever. If the dashed line was only covering the 3, then your decimal would look like this, 0.6, and then 3, 3, 3, 3, 3 repeating. And the dots indicating that it continues on forever. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we need to set as a variable. So what that means is we're going to take our 0.63, we're going to set it as a variable. So we can use any variable. Let's just use n is equal to 0.63. So that's our first equation. Now, down here, so our next step now is multiply the equation. Well, what are we going to multiply it by? So if one number repeats, you're going to multiply by 10. If two numbers repeat, you're going to multiply by 100. And if three numbers repeat, you're going to multiply by 1,000, and so on. So here we have two numbers repeating, so we're going to multiply our whole equation by 100. So I'm just going to show it like this. So we're going to multiply this whole equation by 100. So that gives us a second equation of 100n. All I've done is multiplied 100 times n to give me 100n. And I'm going to take that 0.63 and also multiply it by 100. And that gives me now 63.636363 and so on, repeating. All right, so far so good. And the next step, step number 3, says subtract the two equations. So we have 100n is equal to 63.636363, and then our original equation, which was n, equals to 0. That's a 0 point, and remember it's repeating 63, 63, 0.63, continuing. And now it says to subtract the two equations, so we're subtracting. 100n minus n gives me 99n. And then notice what happens here. 3 minus 3 is 0, 6 minus 6 is 0, 3 minus 3 is 0, and so on. And so we end up now with 99n is equal to 63. All right, and our last step here, because it's 99 times n, we're going to divide by 99 on both sides. 99 divided by 99 leaves us with just n. So therefore, we end up with it's equal to 63 over 99. All right, after this, you can reduce your fraction. So 63 over 99, it can be reduced to 21 over 33, and then we can reduce it again up to 7 over 11. So our final answer, therefore, would be 7 over 11. And if you put this into your calculator, 7 over 11, or 7 divided by 11 into your calculator, you will end up with 0.636363 repeating. All right, so let's try another example. We have another repeating decimal, and we want to put it to its fraction form. So our first step, and you guys can do this on your own or follow along, our first step is set as a variable. So let's set it as a variable. We can use x this time. All right, so x is equal to 0.7. We know this 7 is repeating, and that's going to be our first equation. Then our second step tells us we have to multiply the equation. What are we going to multiply by? If one number repeats, multiply your number by 10. It is only one number repeating, so we're multiplying this equation by 10. So I'm just going to show that here. I'm multiplying this whole equation by 10. So 10 times x is 10x. And 10 times 0.7 gives me 7.7. And then it's still repeating. And so now we're going to subtract the two equations. So that's what it says here. So subtract the two equations. So our first equation was x is equal to 0.7 repeating. So I'm just going to put that underneath here. X is equal to 0.7. I'm just going to show that it's repeating like this, and it continues. And now we're going to subtract those two equations. So this is what's happening here. 7 minus 7 is 0. 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 Then here 7 minus 0 is 7. And then 10x minus 1x is 9x. So we have here 9x is equal to 7. So now we're trying to isolate x. So we're going to divide by 9 on both sides. 9 divided by 9 is just 1. That leaves me with x, which is 7 over 9. So our fraction is 7 over 9, and we can't reduce that any further. And again, you can double check, put 7 over 9 in your calculator, or 7 divided by 9, and you will see it is 0.7 repeating. All right, so in this example, we have 0.83. The 83 is repeating. So the first thing we're going to do is set as a variable. So x is equal to 0.83. 83 is repeating. Second is we multiply, depending on how many digits are repeating. 2 digits are repeating. So we're going to multiply this whole equation by 100. And that gives me 100x is equal to 83.83. 0.83, 83, and so on. And we're going to subtract that from our original equation, which was just x is equal to 0.8383, and so on. All right, so when we start subtracting now, you'll notice all of these will become 0. And then 83 minus 0 is just 83. On this side of the equation, we have 100x minus 1x, which gives me 99x. And then to isolate x by itself, it's 99 times x, so we divide by 99 both sides, which leaves me with x is equal to 83 over 99. All right, and we can't reduce this fraction, so the answer is 83 over 99.